There was an hour on Sunday that nobody talks about anymore. Between dinner and tea, the plates cleared, the kettle on, the wireless humming something quiet in the corner. Your nan at the kitchen table with a mixing bowl and whatever was left in the pantry. Nobody asked her to do it. She just did it. 14 cheap homemade sweets that once turned up on British tables have quietly vanished. Not because they stopped working, because we stopped passing them on. One of them used a technique confectionery scientists have only recently managed to replicate in a laboratory. Your nan was doing it with a wooden spoon and no thermometer, and she had been right about it for decades before anyone with a clipboard agreed. She didn't call it chemistry, she called it giving it a good stir. 14 British sweets your nan made on a Sunday that nobody makes anymore. Number 14, coconut ice. 3 ingredients: condensed milk, icing sugar, desiccated coconut. That is the whole list. No cooking, no stove, nothing that could go wrong. The mixture came together stiff and sticky in the bowl. Half of it went into a tin lined with greaseproof paper and pressed flat with the back of a spoon. The other half got a few drops of red food coloring worked through it until it turned the particular shade of pink that only existed in British kitchens and seaside rock shops. The pink half pressed on top of the white, left overnight on a cool shelf, cut into squares the next morning with a knife run under hot water. A tin of condensed milk cost 8 pence and stretched across 2 batches. A bag of desiccated coconut came out of the cupboard where it had been sitting since the last time somebody made a cake. The icing sugar was always there. Total cost, about 4 pence. Yield roughly 40 squares, enough for Sunday tea and a few wrapped in greaseproof paper for whichever child was heading back to school the next morning. We now pay £3 for a sealed bar of coconut ice in a petrol station on the way to Cornwall, wrapped in plastic, stamped with a date months into the future, tasting of nothing in particular and slightly of the wrap. The original cost 4 pence. The original was pink and white. The original was cut with a buttered knife by somebody who knew your name. Number 13, treacle toffee. Black treacle, butter, brown sugar. Into the heaviest pan in the house, onto the lowest ring on the gas, and then you waited. The mixture went through stages. First a dark, foamy liquid that bubbled lazily around the edges, then a deeper brown, then darker still, almost black, the surface shifting and glossy. The test was a small bead of the mixture dropped into a cup of cold water. If it formed a hard, brittle thread that snapped between your fingers, it was ready. No thermometer, no timer, just a cup of cold water and somebody who had done it enough times to know, poured onto a buttered slab, left to set overnight. Then came the best part. Once cold and hard, your nan wrapped the slab in a clean tea towel and smashed it with a small hammer. Irregular, jagged shards, no two the same, each one wrapped in a square of waxed paper and twisted at the ends. This was bonfire night toffee across Yorkshire and Lancashire, made in huge batches in the first week of November and handed out to children standing round the bonfire with numb fingers. But it was made year-round in households where a tin of black treacle was a permanent shelf fixture. Any day that needed something to suck on while you read the paper, the smell of it boiling was the thing you remembered longest. Dark, burnt, sweet. Got into the curtains. It got into the settee. It stayed in the hallway until Tuesday. Number 12, peppermint creams. This was the first sweet most British children ever made by themselves. Icing sugar into a bowl, a few spoonfuls of condensed milk, a few drops of peppermint essence from the small brown bottle at the back of the cupboard, mixed with a wooden spoon until it came together into a stiff white paste. That was the recipe. No heat, no stage to judge. A child of 6 could make peppermint creams, and a child of 6 often did. Your nan would set bowl on the kitchen table, measure out the ingredients, and then leave the room. The job was handed over completely. Nothing could go wrong. The paste rolled out on a board dusted with more icing sugar. A glass tumbler pressed down to stamp out rounds. The rounds laid out on greaseproof paper on a cold plate, left on the kitchen side to firm up for a few hours. By tea time, they had gone from soft to firm on the outside, and still slightly soft in the middle. The proper use of peppermint creams was not Sunday tea. The proper use was Christmas. Children across Britain spent the week before Christmas making batches, wrapping each one in a small twist of cellophane and giving them to aunts and great-aunts as Christmas presents. Every aunt in Britain had a drawer full of slightly squashed peppermint creams by the first week of January. Every aunt in Britain ate them anyway because a child had made them. Notice what these 3 have in common. No thermometer, no stand mixer, no silicone mold, no piping bag, a bowl, a spoon, a pan, a tin, a cold surface to set things on, and knowledge that lived in the hands of whoever was making them. That knowledge was not written down, it was watched. A child stood next to her mother in a kitchen in Bradford in 1954 and watched the color of the toffee change in the pan. That child made toffee herself in 1978, and her own children stood next to her and watched. 3 generations of it, and then it stopped. The next sweets required actual technique. That technique has been almost entirely forgotten. Number 11, Russian toffee. Nobody in Britain has ever been able to explain why it was called Russian. It contains nothing Russian. It comes comes from no Russian recipe. Your nan called it what her nan had called it, and that was the end of it. Condensed milk, golden syrup, butter, soft brown sugar, into a heavy pan on the lowest heat, stirred gently and constantly for about 25 minutes. You could not walk away from Russian toffee. It caught the moment you turned your back. The mixture went through color changes, pale cream, then biscuit, then the color of strong builder's tea. That was the signal. The test was the soft ball stage. A teaspoon of hot mixture dropped into a cup of cold water, fished out with your fingers and rolled between thumb and forefinger. A soft, pliable ball that held its shape meant ready. A puddle meant longer. A hard bead meant you had gone too far. No thermometer, just cold water, fingertips, and years of making the same sweet on the same gas ring. Off the heat into a buttered tin, set for 2 hours, cut into small squares the color of dark honey, chewy, caramelized, deep in a way only slow-cooked condensed milk ever gets. This was a skill, not a recipe. The recipe was 4 ingredients anybody could list. The skill was knowing, passed hand to hand across 3 generations. Then somebody did not teach the next one, and the knowing was gone. Number 10, cinder toffee. Sugar and golden syrup boiled together in a heavy pan until they turned a deep amber. No stirring once it started bubbling, just watching. The color went from pale gold to honey to the exact shade of a new penny, and that was when the pan came off the heat. Then came the moment. A teaspoon of bicarbonate of soda stirred in fast. The mixture erupted, foamed up the sides of the pan like a small volcano, tripled in volume, hissed and climbed, poured immediately into a buttered tin before it could settle. What set was full of air. Thousands of tiny bubbles trapped in hard amber sugar, snapped into shards with the back of a spoon. Light, brittle, melted on the tongue in seconds. The chemistry is spectacular. The bicarb releases carbon dioxide into the hot sugar. The sugar hardens around the bubbles. Modern confectionery textbooks describe this reaction in technical language. Your nan called it the whoosh. She did it in a saucepan on a Sunday afternoon for 4p and produced a tray of something that the inside of a crunchy bar is now sold at £1.25 a go for a worse version of. Number 9, fudge. Proper stovetop fudge. Sugar, butter, milk, a pinch of salt. Into a heavy pan, stirred over low heat for 25 minutes while it came slowly up to a rolling boil and then settled into the right kind of bubble. Off the heat, and then came the beating. The beating was the whole secret. A wooden spoon in your strongest hand, round and round the pan, steady and hard, for a solid 10 minutes. The mixture started smooth and glossy, then it began to thicken, then it lost its shine. That exact moment was when the fudge had turned. Stop too early, and it stayed soft and greasy in the tin. Stop too late and it turned to sand in your mouth. The window was about 30 seconds wide. There was no equipment that could tell you when you had reached it. Only your own eyes watching the surface, and your arm telling you the mixture had suddenly become heavier. Poured into a buttered tin the moment it turned. Set in an hour, cut into squares that crumbled slightly at the edges and melted on the tongue. The arm ache was real for the rest of the evening. Your nan earned her fudge. The condensed milk microwave version sold as fudge today is not fudge. It is a different thing wearing the name. It never turned. It never lost its shine. Nobody ever beat it with a wooden spoon until their shoulder ached. It is a sweet pretending to be the descendant of something it has no relationship to. Number 8, tablet, the Scottish cousin to fudge. Grainier, harder, sweeter, made with condensed milk and a longer boil, stirred for longer, brought to a higher temperature before being beaten. The result was completely different. Where fudge was soft and yielding, tablet was firm enough to snap. Where fudge melted slowly on the tongue, tablet dissolved into a shower of sugar crystals that went straight to the back of your throat. The graininess was the point. A smooth tablet was a failed tablet. If your tablet looked like fudge, you had made fudge. Try again. Every Scottish kitchen from Aberdeen to the borders made tablet. It travelled south with relatives and appeared in tins on dressers in Newcastle and Manchester and Birmingham. English nans married to Scottish granddads learned to make it from their mothers-in-law. English children learned to recognize the particular sweetness that no English sweet ever matched. Tablet was made in large batches because tablet kept. Stored in a tin lined with greaseproof paper, it stayed perfect for 3 weeks. A single Sunday afternoon's work produced enough to last until the next bank holiday. Number 7, Rocky Road, the original, not the coffee shop version. Broken digestive biscuits, glacé cherries cut in half, a handful of sultanas, cooking chocolate and margarine melted together in a bowl over a pan of hot water. Everything stirred into the melted chocolate, pressed into a tin, left to set in a cold larder for a couple of hours. That was Rocky Road. No marshmallows, no pretzels, no sea salt flakes, no little bits of fudge. no raspberry dust. It was a refrigerator cake made from whatever happened to be in the biscuit tin on a Sunday afternoon. Cheap, quick, honest. The total cost was about sixpence, and that was mostly the chocolate. The digestives were usually the broken ones at the bottom of the tin that nobody wanted to eat as biscuits. The cherries had been sitting in the cupboard since Christmas. The sultanas were left over from the last fruitcake. The artisan coffee shop slice sold at £3.50 is a descendant that forgot where it came from. The original was made by a nan who was clearing out her cupboard on a Sunday afternoon and thought the children might like something sweet with their tea. 7 items in, and the pattern is clear. Every one of these sweets solved a real problem. The biscuit tin was full of broken bits. The cupboard had a tin of condensed milk that had been there for a month. The children needed something to do on a wet Sunday afternoon. The sweet was the answer. None of these recipes were invented in a test kitchen. None of them were developed by a food scientist. They were worked out by women standing over a gas ring, watching what happened, remembering what worked, teaching the next one. A whole culture of improvised domestic confectionery built on nothing more than attention and repetition. The next 7 take that same intelligence and apply it to sweets that required real craft. If any of these are sitting on the tip of your tongue waiting for a name, hit subscribe. The next ones will get you there. Number 6. Chocolate crackles, cornflake cakes, cornflakes, melted cooking chocolate, a spoonful of golden syrup, a knob of margarine, melted together, stirred into the cornflakes until every flake was coated, spooned into paper cases, set on the kitchen windowsill. The windowsill was the fridge. Sunday afternoon in an unheated kitchen was cool enough. An hour later, the chocolate had hardened and the crackles were ready. These were the sweet that British children were sent to make for school fetes, harvest festivals, the church summer fair, the scout group bring and buy. Every mother knew the recipe. Every child could make them without supervision from about the age of 8. They appeared on trestle tables up and down the country every single weekend of the British year. The paper case peeled off and stuck to itself, and that was part of eating one. You got the case in your fingers and the chocolate on your chin and a piece of cornflakes stuck in your back teeth. You ate 3 in a row because nobody was counting. Number 5. Marzipan fruits, ground almonds, icing sugar, egg white, mixed into a stiff yellow paste that smelled strongly of almond essence, divided into small pieces, tinted with a drop of food coloring, shaped by hand into tiny fruits, apples, pears, bananas, strawberries, oranges with a whole clove pressed in for the stalk. This was a Sunday afternoon job that took hours. The children shaped the rough approximations. Your nan shaped the ones that actually looked like fruit. The finished pieces laid out on a wooden board to dry, arranged in a shallow box lined with greaseproof paper, given as a present at Christmas, or kept for a special tea. The smell of almond essence clung to your fingers for hours afterwards. You went to bed that night with your hands still smelling of marzipan, and you could smell it on the pillow in the morning. This was a skill that took patience and produced something beautiful from almost nothing. A bag of ground almonds, a bag of icing sugar, a single egg, 3 ingredients, 2 hours of work, a box of tiny handmade fruit that looked like something from a proper sweet shop in a market town that had not existed since 1960. Number 4. Turkish delight. Homemade, rose-scented, the hardest sweet on this list, the most time-consuming, the most completely forgotten. Corn flour, sugar, water, rose water, boiled together and then stirred over low heat for a full hour. Not 20 minutes, not 40 minutes. A complete hour of constant stirring while the mixture thickened from a pale liquid into a glossy pink paste that clung to the spoon, poured into a tin, left overnight, cut into squares the next morning with a knife dusted in icing sugar. Each square rolled in more icing sugar until it was completely coated. The result was nothing like the Turkish delight in the small boxes sold at Christmas. It was softer, paler, tasted of actual roses, had a texture that was somewhere between jelly and very soft fudge. The icing sugar on the outside kept your fingers from sticking and dissolved on your tongue before you got to the delight underneath. Some households made it every Christmas, stored in a tin lined with greaseproof paper, layered between sheets of more greaseproof paper. The tin came out on Boxing Day, and the Turkish delight was still perfect. The Fries bar sold in newsagents today is a distant relative. The homemade version was what the Fries bar was trying to remember and could not quite manage. Number 3. Butterscotch. Butter, brown sugar, a splash of vinegar, boiled to the hard crack stage, poured thin onto a buttered slab, scored into rectangles with a sharp knife before it set fully, snapped along the scored lines once cold. The vinegar was the detail that nobody understood. Why vinegar? It was not for flavor. It was not detectable in the finished butterscotch at all. It was there to prevent crystallization. The small amount of acid stopped the sugar molecules from forming grainy crystals as the mixture cooled, which kept the butterscotch glossy and smooth. Modern confectioners achieve the same thing by adding a pinch of cream of tartar. Your nan used a splash of vinegar because vinegar was what she had in the cupboard. She did not know why it worked. She knew it worked. She had tried making butterscotch without it once, and the batch had turned gritty, and she had never made that mistake again. Chemistry understood by feel, passed hand to hand, never written down with any explanation of why. The sound of butterscotch snapping cleanly along its scored lines was one of the small, satisfying sounds of a British Sunday afternoon. A sound that told you the cooling had gone right, and the scoring had gone deep enough, and the whole thing had come out as it should. Number 2. Edinburgh Rock. Sugar, water, cream of tartar, a drop of flavoring and a drop of coloring, boiled together, poured onto an oiled slab, and then, while it was still warm and pliable, pulled by hand. The pulling was the entire sweet. Your nan would take the warm sugar mass in her hands, work it back and forth, fold it, stretch it, pull it into a long rope and fold it back on itself, over and over, for about 15 minutes. The sugar changed color as she worked. It went from translucent and glassy to opaque and pale. It took in air. It became something structurally completely different from the sugar that had come out of the pan, cut into short sticks, laid out on a rack, left for 3 to 5 days to go powdery and crumbly. That was the finished state, not a failure. Edinburgh Rock was meant to crumble in your fingers and dissolve on your tongue into nothing. It had no bite. It had no chew. It just disappeared into sweetness. A stick the length of your finger was gone in 30 seconds. The pulling was a skill that took years to learn. The hands had to judge the temperature. Too hot and the sugar burned your palms. Too cool and it would not pull properly. The window was narrow. A professional sweet maker learned it in an apprenticeship. A grandmother learned it from her grandmother. A sweet that required a week of patience and produced something no factory has ever properly replicated. Number 1. Old-fashioned humbugs. Black treacle, soft brown sugar, peppermint oil, a knob of butter, boiled hard to the hard crack stage, divided into 2 portions. One portion left dark, one portion pulled by hand until it turned pale and opaque. The 2 portions laid alongside each other, twisted together and cut into small pieces with a pair of oiled scissors. The stripes were not decoration. The stripes were the whole structure. The dark half stayed hard and glassy. The pale half, which had been pulled, was full of air and slightly chewy. Every humbug had both textures running through it. Bite into one, and you got a hard snap, and then a slow yielding give, all from the same sweet. Confectionery science calls this aeration through mechanical agitation. Your nan called it giving it a good pull. The understanding was exactly the same. The terminology was different because she did not need terminology. She needed the sweet to come out right, and it did. 4 ingredients from any pantry. A genuine craft performed on a kitchen slab. A result that no cellophane-wrapped factory humbug has ever matched. The supermarket version is hard all the way through. It has never been pulled. It is a humbug in name only. The proper ones were wrapped in small twists of waxed paper and kept in a tin on the dresser. The tin came out when the grandchildren visited. Your nan fished out 2 each, closed the tin, and put it back on top of the dresser where the children could not reach it. That is the real loss, not the sweet, the ritual around the sweet, the tin, the dresser, the fishing out, the closing, the nan who knew how many you had already had today. 14 sweets, all of them under 6pence to make. All of them made in a domestic kitchen without specialist equipment. None of them requiring anything that is not still available in any supermarket in Britain today. We did not lose these because they were bad. We lost them because we stopped teaching each other how to make them. The transmission broke. Somewhere between 1965 and 1990, the generation who had watched their mothers make these sweets decided it was not worth teaching their own children. The shops were full of cheap factory sweets. The time was not there. The skill felt old-fashioned. The skill is still there. The ingredients are still in every supermarket. An hour on a Sunday afternoon is all it takes. Try one this week. Peppermint creams take under 20 minutes and a child can make them. Chocolate crackles are ready in an hour. Coconut ice sets overnight and is cut the next morning. You do not need to start with Edinburgh Rock. Start with something easy and see if any of the tastes come back to you. Which of these was in your nan's tin on the dresser? Tell me in the comments. I'll see you next week.